So, welcome back to the channel. It's been a long time since we had a conversation with Anna. As many of you will know, we've all been incredibly busy. There's been trips to Ukraine, there's been this, there's been that, and the whole world is on fire. But that's no excuse not to have Anna back onto the channel, and I'm delighted to welcome her back. If people don't know who Anna is, my first question is, what have you been doing for the last 3 years? But she is an extraordinary Ukrainian blogger, YouTuber who helps explain not just what it's like to live in wartime under Russian aggression. She does that fantastically, of course, but she also explains the Russian mindset, Russian history, and details behind Russian propaganda. And I think that's why these conversations are so important. Anna, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I've missed you and your beautiful community.
Oh, well, we've all missed you tremendously as well and missed these conversations. And we should say as well, before we jump into it, big thank you to everyone who supports your channel, who supports mine, everyone who contributes to help keep this work going. And as we've got the Lviv Media Forum coming up and there's multiple events, big trip coming up. I'm especially grateful to everyone who's bought a coffee, done Patreon, and all the usual things. And of course, very grateful to anyone who supports your channel similarly.
Oh, we can literally drink the coffee people buy you in Lviv.
Yes, with Lviv croissants. If people haven't been there, and I think a lot of people will go to, especially Lviv, but Ukraine after the full-scale war, the food is just fabulous.
Yes.
Yeah, no argument there, just a simple yes. Well, a lot has happened since we last spoke. A lot has happened, and it seems that, to my mind, Ukraine is strengthening its defense, strengthening its ability to push back Russian aggression, despite terrible, terrible human suffering and losses. Ukraine is as strong, at least, if not stronger, than it was at the start of the full-scale invasion. That, at least, is my impression. But it seems the rest of the world is descending into some form of lunacy. Things are weakening all over the place. The political environment, democracy, our resilience, our ability to defend our values, the world economy, everything is sliding into a form of chaos. From a Ukrainian perspective, what does that look like? I mean, are you thinking in your head, for goodness sake, get a grip?
You have described it so beautifully that I could say yes again, and that would be it. First of all, Jonathan, thank you for coming to Ukraine with your extremely valuable missions that combine both the support for Ukraine and our resilience, and also this firsthand experience of what Ukraine is, how we are doing right now, and that we are definitely stronger than it was back in 2022. That is one of the main reasons why we will never accept these conditions of capitulation. And President Zelensky keeps repeating that, and I keep repeating him repeating that, that if we did not give up back in 2022, now with our experience, with our strong army, with the allies, we will definitely not agree on anything that will ruin the freedom, sovereignty of Ukraine and will prolong Russia's aggression against many more countries. I do feel sometimes that Ukraine is an adult country, and there are a lot of these like baby countries, baby leaders that keep trying to find various excuses, various reasons why this is not their war, this is not a problem. And recently I've started one of my videos on the channel with a question. Please imagine yourself like 20, 30 years ago, reading your newspaper in your country with the headline like thousands of North Korean soldiers are now fighting in the center of Europe, and not just soldiers, but soldiers with the ammunition, with the big missiles that are targeted on the European cities. What would be the reaction in the United States, in Britain, in the European Union? Perhaps something devastating for the North Korea and the country that invited them there, Russia. And right now, no reaction at all. I remember how at the very start of Zelensky's career, he is quite controversial press officer said that he is the greatest leader of mankind. And people in Ukraine, we typically do not worship our leaders. We felt like, and now I do have this feeling when I see how people try to hide from the responsibilities, try not to notice Russian hybrid warfare against their countries, try not to notice that Russia keeps mobilizing and conscripting new people, that Russia has these trainings in Belarus, that Trump wants to give up on the support of the European partners. The world is in chaos, in fear, and that is definitely not the best strategy if you want to defend what is valuable for yourself. And this makes me once again more confident in the Ukrainian resilience, in the Ukrainian experience, and of course, number one, in the Ukrainian armed forces.
And of course, this hasn't happened by accident. And it's easy for political leaders to think, chaos in the Middle East, chaos between India and Pakistan, chaos everywhere is somehow accidental. No, this is by design. Of course, there are processes ongoing, and you have periods where democracy is stronger and weaker, where it's under threat, and where it's on the ascendancy. Um, and it sort of ebbs and flows like a tide. There are sort of natural movements going on, but a lot of the chaos we see is entirely by design. And one of the main architects of that chaos, of course, is the little sort of toxic gnome in the Kremlin. But he's also reflecting, I think, a sort of had a conversation. The academic didn't quite agree with this phrase, but Russia thinks of itself as the sort of spiritual home of autocracy. It's a way of doing business. It's a way of living. It's a way of organizing human affairs, which is not only natural to the subjects of the Red Fortress, but it's something that they want to propagate. It's something they want to impose upon other people, spread like some virulent virus. And I think that's what we're seeing. And a lot of the development that's taken place over the last 2 decades is to create narratives, tools, methodologies, toolkits, as it were, to export autocracy, to package it up and help people who are aspiring autocrats to overcome their democratic systems. Does that sound too conspiratorial, or do you see some reflection in reality there?
Yeah, in my previous life, I've been an academician, and it was totally okay to speak about fashion in science. Typically, when something great was discovered in physics, a similar approach, a similar terminology could later be mirrored in, I don't know, psychology, biology, medicine, linguistics, and that's totally okay. That's like a trend. What we observe right now is a trend for autocracies, for authoritarian regimes. I'm very grateful that you invite a lot of very interesting speakers on your channel, and one of them is Valery Portnikov and Vitaly Portnikov, and he speaks a lot about this difference between the mindset of Russia, China, and the Western world, the democratic world. And uh, it even seems from a faraway perspective that autocracies demonstrate this stability that many people want. And just have a look at how China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea cooperate. They don't have any misunderstandings. They don't have months of bureaucracy. The change of something does not change the global attitude. And when we look at the democratic side, we observe a totally different approach. We see um, a new president of the United States treats Russian war against Ukraine 100 degrees differently than the previous president of the United States. Countries that buy weapons from the US cannot use them the way they want, or other things. And this makes many people feel more confident about autocracies because they do not shift their attitudes that quickly. They provide what they guarantee. Unfortunately, it's not based on the respect of human life, on the desire to make the quality of your life better, to change your life for the better. It's based just on this desires and money or power for the dictators, but it works pretty effectively, contrary to what we observe with quarrels, bureaucracies, and shifting attitudes. So I think it's not for the first time in human history. Perhaps it's a part of our nature. We observed something similar in the 20s, 30s in Europe, and the history returns itself, and like good times, they bring up weaker people. And unfortunately, that is what we to some extent observe when countries openly declare they don't have the armed forces, they don't have the zeal to defend themselves. And that is a tendency. And our enemies, unfortunately, they see that. And I don't want to sound like an arrogant Ukrainian, but I will. In this environment, we look pretty resilient, pretty decisive, and very determined. And those Russian propaganda stories that wanted to describe Ukraine as a country with problems in conscription and so on. Look at us now after 3 years. The fourth year has already started of the full-scale war. We are many times smaller than Russia from this population perspective, human resources perspective, but we're fighting very effectively. We have new soldiers, we have new brigades, and I'm not sure a similar heroism could be repeated in many countries around the world.
There are several ways, I think, in which Western powers could help at this point. But it requires, I think, a realistic assessment of what resources they've got, what equipment they've got, and whether that has genuine deterrent power to Russia. I don't know as well, when you and uh, some other, fantastic Ukrainians who I speak to about NATO, I think you have a clear-eyed view of it. There are many who are involved in NATO or have been involved in the past or see NATO in the way it was during the Cold War as providing genuine deterrence for Russian aggression. I think many Ukrainians I speak to will say, look, that doesn't exist anymore. It's a zombie organization. It has no deterrent power because the dynamic has changed, not just on the Western side, but on the Russian side as well. Putin is far more fine-tuned into the reality of power than the appearance of it. And NATO just is either no longer functional or doesn't have any deterrent capability. Would you kind of agree with that? And if so, what are the implications?
I don't want to be that categoric because, as a Ukrainian, I am very grateful to the countries of NATO and their experience and the equipment they provide to Ukraine, and that helped us fight all these years. I do believe that a lot of approaches inside NATO are super effective, especially in reforming the relations inside the management inside the army, and that's what all the Ukrainian soldiers report. But unfortunately, some ways of conducting combat operations, they are very outdated. What is good? Soldiers, trainers who come from NATO countries or who invite Ukrainian troops to be trained on the ground with each month, they say they want to learn more and more from us than the country. Because a lot of this big armored vehicles, tanks, and they are not working or they cannot be well protected in drone warfare. What Ukraine is doing right now with our marine drones, with different kinds of surveillance attack drones, it's tremendous. And many armies, even those ranked at the top inside NATO do not have any of this experience. They don't have even like specific drone units, enough of them, or some of them do not have access to this like combat drones, and they need this experience. Plus, they can also produce and learn on the ground here in Ukraine. One of the reasons why the EU soldiers, for example, or American soldiers should be allowed to be present in Ukraine, not to fight on the front lines, but to learn, to develop together, to observe, to get this valuable experience. Because North Korean soldiers, Chinese mercenaries, they are not only helping Russia, they are also getting this experience for the future wars. During decades of peace, many NATO missions were to countries that are different from Russia, that they were fighting some small groups in the mountains that did not possess satellite images, nuclear weapons, and millions of drones produced in that country. So we have to be realistic about that. Unfortunately, we also see that the alliance itself is not very um, elite, how do you say that, is not working that smoothly together. We see that Donald Trump has different attitudes towards the responsibility of the United States in NATO. They often talk about the desire to take away the American soldiers from the European soil. I'm not sure it's the perfect moment. Even if you want that in future, it's definitely not the time when when China actually sends North Korean soldiers, because it's only with the blessing of China. Why? The other side takes very wrong actions in this context. And we see like a lot of countries who have very different opinions, and this to some extent causes chaos in the decision-making processes. And one of the things that causes most irritation inside Ukraine is when Trump repeats Kremlin's propaganda about NATO provoking Russia. Oh my God, it's just like, first of all, if we're talking about Bucharest summit, it was in 2008 or something. It was long before the attacks on Ukraine. Second, we are an independent, largest in Europe country that can do whatever we want. Third, did you know anything about the planned attacks of NATO on Russia? Did NATO want to invade Moscow, St. Petersburg? Why didn't we hear about that? Like,
Mhm.
are you serious about that? Personally, when I hear an American or a European repeating this phrase like NATO, I wanted to attack Russia, I consider them traitors to their own countries, because
Mm.
what we observe right now is that NATO not just simply a defensive alliance, it's just like a non-escalation alliance, and it does not respond even in the situation when it is necessary. My
And
hope
also, we have
that
to ask, don't we? I mean, Finland, for instance, the evidence.
Finland and
s-
Sweden,
Yeah,
yeah. The Finland and Sweden, congratulations to these countries. That was a very wise move, joined NATO after the start of Russia's full-scale war. And the length of the border, NATO-Russia, grew like more than 1,000 kilometers.
it did. But did
And now,
Russia fortify that border? Did they suddenly rush divisions and battalions to protect against NATO incursion from Finland? No, they withdrew 80% of their military
yeah.
resources from that border to send to Ukraine. So the evidence suggests they know NATO offers no threat whatsoever.
Of course. Look, I think that before the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they knew NATO is not a threat to them. And now, witnessing this chaos and decision-making process, this desire, like, no, 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 we don't want Ukraine, we don't want this and that, they see that the situation even worse than they wanted it to be, and they see that, like, no need at all to be afraid. I hope that this will be a wake-up call at a set moment in time, witnessing Russian hybrid warfare, witnessing their constant attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, understanding that Donald Trump is just all about chaos. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for NATO, and it has a tremendous potential to grow stronger. If not, new unions, new alliances may be shaped, and that's what we often talk about here in Ukraine. There are a lot of like Baltic countries, Nordic countries interested in that, and we speak about this like Baltic Sea, Black Sea, vertical. There are a lot of ideas. And I think that the basic principle here will be this understanding of the eternal threats that Russia imposes on the democracies close to its borders. You don't need to explain anything to Finland, to Lithuania. And this determination, multiplied by Ukrainian experience, can be of great help. And I also hope that NATO leaders will understand that with Russian army, with Chinese army, with North Korean army gaining this extremely valuable modern experience on the front lines, they do need Ukraine as a partner with the Ukrainian experience. That will be of help not just for us. Let's forget about this very important things like human life, democracy, values, and simply think about things that Ukraine can give to NATO. Right now, we are a very valuable asset with our experience, with our determination, and with very real and strong army.
That was a point that General Zaluzhny made, who's now the ambassador of Ukraine to London. He made that exact point that Ukraine's experience, the scale of armed forces, the number of people who are, trained and highly experienced in this modern warfare, plus the extraordinary development in sort of drone technology, as well as drone technology techniques and so on, mean that the experience that Ukraine has got is unmatched anywhere in the world except for Russia. Russia and Ukraine are, at this point in time, the only two countries in the world that really understand the intricacies of modern warfare. Now, we can argue that Russia has not necessarily innovated that well. It has not dispersed those techniques down at scale to its troops, and it still has a highly vertical structure, highly assumptive, vertical, corrupt structure. In fact, that's all true. But still, in terms of scale and experience, nothing on the Western side matches that. I think Zaluzhny's point is that not only are our militaries outmatched, our procurement processes, our training processes, every aspect actually of our military industrial complex is no longer fit for purpose. It was quite a dramatic kind of speech he gave recently.
But that's the reality. You know, we keep talking about this normalcy bias that prevent people from seeing the situation the way it is. And many generations grew up in times of the Cold War and even after the Cold War, believing that these strong technologies or big tanks can protect them from Russia. Forgetting that the war can change, just as like artificial intelligence came into our lives, or I don't know, mobile technologies improved. And this modern warfare has nothing in common with this old style tank battles. They do happen on the front lines. That is important. But the majority of combat operations are now drone operations. And it's also about the access to internet. It's about the access to satellite GPS data. And it is about this big wars, you know. Once again, I know that a lot of people, including volunteers who travel to Ukraine, they have a lot of discoveries. Even though they live in the context, they follow the updates. First, they come to Ukraine. I don't know if you had a similar experience, but I remember one friend telling me that they crossed the border, they entered Lviv, and he thinks, now we will be in Kharkiv soon. And then a day passes, and they are not yet in Kharkiv because Ukraine is big and they are still traveling. And the same about the war. the war is this full-scale Second World War style. I mean, in the number of explosions, in the number of infantry involved. It's huge, it's big. And Russia has China on its side. And China is really good in the production of drones and elements for drones. And that is a big problem for most of the European countries and the United States that produced a lot of these things elsewhere. And then one bad day, China may stop like selling something and it will be a problem. Once again, Ukraine has this on the ground experience. You know about a lot of beautiful drone constructing, developing initiatives that now are working here in Ukraine. Why not strengthen that? Once again, I sure understand that not many people want to join the armed forces of their countries. Not many people want to fight in Ukraine. But simply keep supporting Ukraine. Do not count that in money, billions, and so on. Simply start counting that in tanks, missiles, I don't know, data that you can support us with, because that's what we need. We always need ammunition, not cash. Ammunition, and Ukraine will do the job. We don't have a choice. We unfortunately border that Frankenstein of the Russian Federation. We have people, we have determination. It is our fight. But help us and don't make artificial obstacles, because many viewers and friends keep asking me, are you afraid that Trump will abandon Ukraine? He will get out of this negotiations process, which is totally unnatural and did not have any background reasons for. But no, in Ukraine, we are afraid that he will interfere in the decisions of other countries to support us. And we'll observe that already. Australia wanted to give some Abrams tanks, and the US does not give a permission. Then he turned off intelligence sharing. I am not even reminding about the Budapest Memorandum. I'm saying just, okay, if the United States abandon Europe, abandon Ukraine, don't want to be global leaders, want to live separately, isolated. Maybe Europe understands that it is our fight. It's about the future invasion of Russia and other countries to literally any potential zone. But I am so afraid that Trump will start interfering and preventing these countries from supporting Ukraine to the fullest because of some outdated, like rules. You bought our tank 50 years ago, but it is still us who have to give this permission. You don't see that in China or North Korea when they supply Russia with thousands of shells per month.
Yes, and 80% of Russian shells are now apparently coming from North Korea. There's also stories about how potentially Trump administration is blocking the transfer of more F-16s and other equipment. That's something we need to really dig into, because one of the things that the Allies could potentially do, and this isn't me speaking as a military expert, this is having got the opinions of people who are genuine military experts. Boots on the ground is problematic for many, many reasons, including the fact that we don't have the boots. We've convinced ourselves that we're far better equipped and manned than we actually are. But what we do have is planes. And what we can pull together is air defense systems. So there is a possibility that the West could close the skies over Western Ukraine, let's say up to the Dnipro. This this could be a
I
significant
like
contribution.
I like this kind like when we say West Ukraine to Dnipro. That's a good approach. That's a good. To Dnipro, Zaporizhia. Let it be all West Ukraine. I don't mind if it's about the protection of the skies. Uh, you are right. Let me be sentimental for a second, which is not very common for me. Uh, you know, it's all like human lives, and it is so bad with the modern White House. You don't have to speak about this small things like a possibility to save lives. During this attempts of a ceasefire, the number of attacks on Ukraine grew, escalated, and the number of civilians that died during this month, it's 2.5 times more than before Trump started anything. And many remember how President Zelensky wanted to buy Patriot systems for $15 billion to buy, not to borrow, but to buy for $15 billion. And we all know Trump is about money, Trump is about business, and he said no. So we may say that partially the responsibility is on the White House right now. That's the strategy of Putin. Putin wants to drag this imitation of negotiations as long as possible, making Donald Trump and those who support him accomplice with the Russian war crimes. That is a plan. And I don't know why the sky above Ukraine was not closed back in 2022. What is the reason? Because that is a direct conflict with Russia. No, you're not doing that on the Russian territory. You simply protect Ukrainian schools, hospitals, you save Ukrainian lives. I'm very happy that my people, my fellow men, are not filled with like hatred, with dissatisfaction, with despair, with this constant feeling of betrayal. We are not. We keep fighting and hoping that the world will not collapse because of Russia being stronger than all the wealthy, happy, and with the best potential democratic world. But it's a question of morals too. Why the sky above Ukraine was not closed back in 2022. It's not about attacks on Russian territory. It's about protecting Ukraine. Does Ukraine have a right to exist? Yes. Is it a legal country, independent, sovereign? Yes. According to the international law. Did this country give up nuclear weapons to guarantee security for the world? Yes. Then why can't we protect its people from simply dying? Because this may escalate what? You know, this very first jokes at the start of the war about the need to compromise when Russia says, we want to kill all Ukrainians. Ukrainians say, we want to survive. And someone comes and says, you have to compromise 50-50. That is what we live through at this moment. I honestly do not know. You know, I travel sometimes and I travel to the countries that border Ukraine. And I can see, and I like it, it's good, but I can see like 5, 6, 7 Patriot systems around some of the airfields, airports there that they are not using actively, that they will not protect, I am afraid, in case of Russian drone attacks or missile attacks, because they will be afraid of the escalation. And I realized that just like one of that Patriot systems could really help Ukraine that is already fighting. You don't want this war to come on your territory, but please, just like, how can you feel okay having something that can save people who die? And you've seen what they do with Kryvyi Rih, with Sumy, with Kyiv. You've seen that children, that's, they also see that. And somehow it doesn't work. So we also experience not the decline, not just the problems, serious problems with diplomacy, but with this moral collapse of many. Let's limit it so far to the political leaders, not the people, because I feel great support of people, and you see that all the best initiatives, all the best volunteering initiatives and support, this is made by people from the United States, from Britain, from Australia, from France, from Hungary. They are very different from the so-called leaders.
I think that's right. I think when I speak to people who are close to, our apparatchiks, as it were, our administrators, our strategists, everything's complicated. It all comes down to resources. It comes down to this, balance of powers, not wanting to trigger Russia and blah, 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 blah. I think it's essentially far simpler. It's not a lack of resources because the resources can be found if there's will. It's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of moral clarity. It's a lack of will. It's a lack of imagination. These are the things we're lacking because, the history of the Second World War shows that if you have the will and leadership, then frankly anything is possible. and the resources come together under that situation.
But we do know that the European Union is way richer than Russia. I will not remind you about GDPs. I know there are different formulas, but it's quite obvious that without the support of China, North Korea, and Iran, Russia would fail long ago. So, at least to prevent those countries from supporting Russia. If we see that, Jonathan, our enemies also see that. They also know what mechanisms are broken. They know how to trigger them again and again. And I hate this uh, phrase like, let's not provoke Russia. Come on, Russia is not provoked. Russia is constantly doing what it wants and gets a reward for its terrorist actions. It happened in 2008 when they attacked Georgia, and no real response, only from those countries that really know what Georgia is. Then 2014, the annexation of Crimea. Let's not escalate. Let's give Putin all he wants. And now a very similar discourse about 5 regions, the legal status of Crimea. If Putin gets anything he wants by murdering and committing genocide in Ukraine, why would he stop? Because he's afraid of Trump? I'm sorry. I'm not afraid of Trump. He is 78, will be 79. And like 5 years later, shall we make exorcism? Like if we need some help or advice from him. That is insane. And I feel very disappointed that so many people who seem to be reasonable obey so quickly, worship so quickly, and express this. Just before our interview, I watched this comments of Waltz, of Pompeo. Oh, no, no, I'm sorry, not Pompeo, Rubio, and some other people in Trump's cabinet, and how they were complimenting his 100 days of chaos. And it was not just simple compliments, just like, thank you for the opportunity to make. It was just like, never, ever, 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 ever before in the life of the humankind we have observed such wisdom and you watch that and you cannot believe it is happening right now in Washington.
It's phenomenal. It's if you had what's his name, sort of Borat, or the actor who does that,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
you couldn't make a satirical film that actually captures what we're seeing there. No one would believe it.
Yeah, it's just like, and it happens so quickly. I don't know. This process of like evolution is so slow, and this like degradation is so fast.
I'm looking forward to the Armando Iannucci version of Trump's first 100 days, like the death of Stalin, that film.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think there's lots of materials.
There's just so much. In a minute, I'm going to ask you about your second channel that you've launched and your more sort of personal reflections on the war. Before we get to that, here's a kind of quick topic. This is going to be the sort of clickbait topic that probably the thumbnail is going to be based on. But Zelensky has been trolling Trump. Trump, no, trolling Putin. And he's perfectly right. I mean, it is a legitimate target, saying that the 80th anniversary celebration of the Second World War, the war which the Soviet Union helped to begin, this is a legitimate target. Do you think that this is going to be disrupted? Should it be disrupted by Ukraine? And what might be the foreign reaction to that?
Well, first, I want something big. I wanted something very clickbait, so that the videos where we report about what happened there later would be banned by YouTube. That's what I want. First, I remember when we first started fighting back, there were lots of people telling me, aren't you afraid what Russia will do to you after that? Aren't you afraid they will drop Oreshnik on you or something like that? And I could not understand how can people be so like narrow-minded because they committed Bucha. They attacked Ukraine without any reason and they will keep killing us. They made Holodomor in the 30s. They destroyed lots of Ukrainian writers and intellectuals in the 30s. That's a constant process. Russia uses any opportunity to destroy Ukraine. And our task is to destroy this modern Russian authoritarian regime, to ruin their imperial myths once and forever. And I have just finished reading Pomerantsev's last book about how to win the information war. And I can tell you 100% we desperately lack some bad people, because you cannot win war against these war criminals, genocidal maniacs, by only playing by the rules. And I belong to that part of the world that believes Ukrainians have all the moral rights to defend ourselves on the Russian territory too. I am proud that we don't target the civilian objects, and I am 100% sure we will never attack schools or hospitals as they did. And Ukrainian soldiers fed families in Kursk, did not rape, loot them, and torture them and as Russian soldiers in Bucha. And it's not just about being kind to Russians, it's just about preserving yourself, because I want us to survive this war, not to be that traumatized as many expect, and to grow into this very strong, resilient generation as it was after the Second World War. I'm sure Britain of 50s, Britain of 60s was not that bad. And I want this kind of thing for Ukraine, so that we are not a ruin, but we are good, strong people. And for that, we will not lose our moral, we will not be filled with hatred. But I'm sure that to destroy the Kremlin, to target the Kremlin goblin, is a perfect plan. And the fact that Zelensky says that is good. For decades, they wanted to make us live in fear, expecting the next move of Russia. Unfortunately, this approach still works with many our countries abroad, that Russia says something and, oh my God, nuclear weapons, oh my God, something. If you are afraid of Russia using nuclear weapons, change something in Russia. Not stop following their demands. It doesn't work like that with terrorists, but change something in Russia. Change something inside the country, starting with Putin and finishing with the population, which we cannot name citizens. And I think that the Russian Federation itself is very fragile. You see, they cannot control their borders. Their air defense is not working, and Ukrainian drones can target strategic for Russian military, Russian economy objects numerous times, repeatedly. And even when they know we can reach that, we can destroy it, then they will try to rebuild it for months. They cannot protect it. A lot of people inside Russia are dissatisfied with the work of air defense. They are talking about the need to create private armies, which is a sign they don't trust the regular army. They are a house of cards. And the more they see explosions, they witness what war is inside Russia, the more concerned they will have, whether they really want it, whether they really like it, because right now the support for Russian war is really high. This is not Putin's war. Putin is the product of that society. And when they see war, when they hear explosions, when they see smoke, when they get air raid alerts, and I see these messages in Russian Telegram channels, missile danger for Orel region. This is something they could not experience 2 or 3 years ago. When Putin began his war to protect Russia, he actually brought war back to 10, 15 Russian regions that are under constant attack, military legitimate object there. So to target the parade or something like it would be great. I am sure all the people there are war criminals responsible for a lot of bloody crimes, and not only in Ukraine, in Chechnya, in Georgia, in Syria, in many special military operations we don't know about. And I actually believe that one of the reasons why Putin wanted this weird 3-day ceasefire is to protect his Frankenstein guests during the parade. And I hope you will have more beautiful updates from that Pobedobesия on the 9th of May. I hope Zelensky is not trolling. I hope Zelensky is, like um, focusing or providing, like prognosing.
I hope Bananov is not taking a holiday. He needs to be in his office planning this in detail. Um, and that's extraordinary. It leads to an extraordinary conclusion because many people confuse what in Ukraine we see, which is resilience, something which is very familiar or would be very familiar to that generation who went through the Blitz, I think, in Britain. It's prior to the war, you don't believe, you can survive anything like that. And I think the British very quickly found that anger is turned into a sort of hard stoicism to sort of overcome and to win. And Ukraine has that in every fiber of its being. But we confuse the Russian willingness to submit to suffering, to endure pain and unpleasantness. We equate that with resilience, but it seems these are entirely different things. That actually Russians are, in the main, rather cowardly, and that if Ukraine was to target Moscow in particular, I mean, this comes from a recent interview I did with Yuri Felshtinsky, whose main conclusion was bomb the shit out of Moscow and don't let up until they stop. But his point, I think, was serious, which is all the wealth, all the power, and any political influence there might be is all in Moscow. Moscow is everything. It's you can compare it to a tumor that sucks the life and energy out of the Russian Federation, but it's also the head that commands everything. If you strike that and strike it repeatedly, then this starts to bring the war home. Over 3 years, the majority of Muscovites, whether they're rich, poor, or somewhere in between, have been able to almost sort of forget there's a war on or convince themselves that it has nothing to do with them, that they're not involved, even though many of them are directly involved in funding it, financing it, coding drones and doing all this kind of stuff. But they've convinced themselves it's something far away happening to someone else. Bring the war home to them is a key psychological tool of actually Ukraine's defense.
You know, you said it so beautifully, and it once again triggered my bad Anna regime. If we know that Russians submit to sufferings, we should use that.
That's what they want. Let's give it to them. Yes.
If that's something that makes them feel real, if that's something that brings them the stance in their lives, we can do it. Why in their instruction of usage, there is no text, it should be always Putin. It can be Ukrainian armed forces. But jokes aside, you're totally right. Russia is unnaturally big. Of course, that's the country that does not need any new territories because lots of its territories are uninhabited. And the decision-making center is Moscow and St. Petersburg. That's it. And that is why Putin is always very much afraid of any attacks, explosions, closed airports in two of these cities. Because if there is a tiny protest potential or any problems that can be caused to his regime, they can only come from Moscow, St. Petersburg. The rest of Russia is just a resource zone for them. They have very strong special forces there, and you see that protests disappear very quickly until they reach this like information networks or something like that. So problems in Moscow, problems in St. Petersburg is definitely something that will make Putin's regime more shaky and may inspire, for example, a coup around him. Once again, I know this will not be the solution of a problem because the problem is huge. The problem is millions of tiny, unsatisfied Putins that submit to sufferings in every corner of Russia. But this may be a good turbulent period to change something and to cause more uh, processes inside the Russian Federation. But I do like it. Russians love to submit to suffering. That's the recipe.
That's really give them more of what they want.
Keep
And yes,
on,
it
Wanda.
sounds
Keep on.
cruel, but unfortunately, yes, when you
Hmm.
define the meaning of your life, when you define value in your life more due to pain and trauma than to positive characteristics, it poisons everything. It poisons every experience. Food can't be enjoyed purely for itself. Alcohol can't be enjoyed as an experience in moderation. Culture, architecture, all these things that give joy to life, including, other bodily functions as well. Everything becomes poisoned and perverted.
Hmm. Yeah, just read some of the Dostoevsky works. Well,
And Pilevin and more modern examples that are,
yeah,
the
but they don't
literature
give
of
you.
trauma.
Yeah, yeah, that is a very traumatized, very unhappy nation. Honestly, I think that an average Ukrainian with this constant air raid alerts with members of his family on the front lines is a happier person because perhaps of this internal attitudes, because of some light that is present in our hearts. And when you look at this Russian, like Russian cultures, they keep talking about some art that was created back in the 19th century. But if we talk about culture, it's the way people live, eat, buy products. We also talk about like this, typical English culture, typical French culture, typical Spanish culture. I learn Spanish right now and I see how differently they shape the world and I grasp this culture. So that's the culture. It's not just about the collections of art at the museums or ballet dancers that moved away from Russia 20 years ago when they had this opportunity. And this kind of Russian culture, it's very, very unhappy, very dark, very miserable. And once again, it rotates around the sufferings. And what they want to bring the world is more sufferings. Like they share it. That's the export. That's what they come to Ukraine with. That's what they want to come to Germany or Britain. They want to bring sufferings, take them as we take them because they are unable to change anything inside. They believe they hate others for living normal lives, even with the same amount of money, I don't know, with the same opportunities. But the way people talk, the way people joke about their politicians, the freedom that you have filming something on the street, the joy that you may experience when you are quarreling with someone, they
Yeah.
don't have it. They obey, they surrender, and they export sufferings.
And I don't know if you saw the clip. It was on Twitter, but it's sort of emblematic, and this will resonate, I think, for anyone who's been in the Russian provinces. There's this clip of a woman who clearly is either mentally unwell or a mixture of both. Um, Full of loathing as well, and it's a sort of classic sort of Plощadka, the sort of play area in between apartment blocks where you've got some swings and stuff. And it looks like the sort of children's swings and stuff might have been recently replaced because you'll remember it. You'll know what the Soviet era ones look like. They're extremely dangerous and often rusted, and but kids are still playing on
Fortunately,
them.
yeah.
Yes. um, so this looked like it had been relatively recently replaced. And there's this woman wearing, the loose kind of dress, which is typical for, sort of babushkas and that kind of thing. And she comes with a little bag and she wanders over and she's being filmed. And she wanders over to the swings and she gets some feces out of the bag and then starts rubbing it all over the kids' swings.
Jonathan.
It's just, but it's the commentary of the people who are filming her, and it's just, and obviously, in Russian, they're just saying like, "Oh goodness, she's out again doing this," you know, Everyone's looking at her from their windows. No one's going to do anything. That includes the two people who are talking about it, filming it. You can hear on the clip. And then they say this phrase. They say, "Well, this is just typical of our people. This is just typical of Russia. Someone sees something nice. Someone sees something new. Someone sees people enjoying something, and they just have to come and spoil it." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness."
And that's true. I will try to find one very ugly article that I can share only with you because you're a friend and you were talking about this right now. But there was an article written, I guess, somewhere after the liberation of Bucha and Kyiv region. And apart from this, like very tragic, very genocidal part, a lot of people returned back to their houses and found out that some Russian soldiers stayed there for a period. And it was not just about looting, it was also about leaving lots of this stuff everywhere. And many people did not want to continue living in their houses after what they witnessed. And it was not that like toilets were not working. It was a choice of that like soldiers to do it, I don't know, on a bed. And there was an article later that I have come across, and it analyzed that Russians had very typical behavior during the Second World War when they traveled westwards, liberating, countries and leaving, I'm sorry, their shit literally everywhere. And that is a part of their Russian culture. That's what Russian culture is, dear viewers.
Literally defecating on other people's stuff. Um, there's another book I haven't I was shown it, but I'm having trouble finding it. And it's a collection of graffiti. So it's out of recently, when Izium and Butcher and all these areas were liberated, someone went around and photographed the graffiti on surfaces. And again, they said it's horrific, some of it's just odd. Um, some of it even, there's some graffiti that with apologies, odd. But some of it is very telling to the kind of mindset you're talking about there. Really disturbing kind of stuff. Some of it's just ludicrous and almost humorous. And very dark kind of humor. That's another feature. Of course, Ukrainian culture is a sort of, ability to have this sort of dark humor in wartime. But I'm gonna try and get my hands on it because this sounds like a great sort of article or book and very sort of insightful there. While before we jump off, I wanted to ask you about your other project, which is to try and bring a far more sort of personal reflections to the war. What motivated you to do that? How's it going? What has been the reception of the audience?
Thank you so much for asking. That's a precious project of mine, and I believe it can be useful. There are two reasons that inspired me to start it. Number one is, I have started my main channel at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, understanding how little people know about Ukraine. And I had this desire to explain our spirit, our resilience, what's behind this miracle? Why didn't you collapse? You had like 3 days, the largest army in the world, and so on and so forth. And I realized that there are so many things people don't know about us. And I was not, because some people may feel offended, like, why don't you know about the us? Why don't you know about the position of Ukraine on the map? Why don't you know this or that? I was, on the contrary, very grateful to the people who wanted to learn something about Ukraine, who wanted to discover my country, my culture, my language, my people. And I kept talking about that. Now I've realized that very few people truly understand what kind of war that is, because there are a lot of questions that I receive about our behavior during air raid alerts or blackouts. And some of them are quite far away from the reality. And then people may have this like clashes between what they expect and what they see. Because they can see, I don't know, people buying good products at the supermarkets, going to bless food on Easter, and then a missile will come and destroy that. And I want to demonstrate this like abnormality. What is life like in times of the big war from a civilian perspective? And I've covered a number of topics there, starting from food in Ukraine, because there are people who ask me, can you get food in Ukraine? You've been to Ukraine. You know that here you can get one of the best food ever.
It's
Do we
the
have
best
shortages?
food. It is literally the best food, and you don't get the
Here
sense
in
of.
Lviv, here.
But everywhere you go, even when you're, within
Yes.
just a few miles of the war zone, and this is something that we shared earlier, you're in a terrifying place, and then you arrive at a petrol station. And this particular one was maybe sort of 30, 40 miles from Taritsk. And you go in,
Mhm.
and there's Easter eggs and little plastic toys, and it's all neat and it's tidy, and all the shelves are stocked, and there's 2 dozen types of crisps, and we could even get, all our favorite British chocolate bars, and it's all there. And yet, out of the
Yeah.
window,
And then people and they have this typical image of war that like if you are at war you don't have food. It happened during these months of occupation when people had to hide in the cellars. It may happen, I don't know, in a trench, but in general, even soldiers on the front lines have good food. That's a part of the Ukrainian. And I had this like conceptual problem when people think you are at war, you need to want you must be hungry. No, but I can eat and I can be killed at the moment I eat. That's also the truth of this war, of this modern Russian war crimes when they target pizzerias, for example, as it was, right? And another thing, I have recorded a lot of sounds of war. A sound of an air raid alert during the day, during the night, drones working in Kyiv. I have a friend who recorded explosions in Kharkiv. And we can, I don't know how, because I live in the semi-safe zone. We don't get a lot of explosions. When I'm in Kyiv, I always hear them. That's a part of life in Kyiv. But I don't know how. Is it an inborn quality? But really quickly, I can hear, oh, that's a good sound. That's a bad sound. That's an air defense shooting. That's something bad. And I think that is an important video that I shared with these sounds. And a lot of people told me they were listening to it at home in the silence of their homes. And they had a tremendous like discovery about Ukraine, because that's what you don't think about when you read the news, when you hear about. But there are thousands of Ukrainians that survive these attacks, but they hear these sounds, they change the pace of our hearts, they change the pace of our thoughts. They ruin some of our plans. Maybe it's not life, it's not always life. Often it's life, but it's also one of my greatest memories that I wanted to share in that video was during the very first days of the war. I woke up at night without any specific reason, and then in a couple of minutes, I've heard a sound of something very ugly rolling the skies. It was unusual. It was not an aircraft I could recognize. It was not like a scooter. It was something bigger. It was just like, as if the orbit of the Earth was squeaky and rusty. And I didn't like the sound. It was ugly. I realized it was just a couple of seconds, and then I heard an explosion. I did not get the news. It was March. It was perhaps one of the reasons why I started my Anna from Ukraine channel. And I had this like, I have a bit of a writer living in me, and I had this feeling I might have heard someone's death. I might have heard someone's death seconds before that stuff killed the person. And in the morning, we've learned it was perhaps one of the worst attacks. 6 people were killed by a missile. And you somehow feel that. And I share this kind of things on the channel, starting like from food and finishing with my blackout experience. I share videos once a week, not much. But we have like more than 8,000 friends already, and this makes me happy. And another reason, more pragmatic and less optimistic, I feel the world is a dangerous place. And I feel some people in some corners of the world might need my Ukrainian civilian experience in times of the big war. That's why I've shared my go-to bag, bug out bag there, and some blackout experiences that once again may help people if they need. I hope they will never need it, but once again, it's better to be prepared than not. So thank you for asking.
No, it's very moving because I think it's very difficult for people to. Uh, it's easy to empathize, but it's difficult to understand all the nuance and the texture of that sort of lived experience. And
Excellent.
and I still remember the look on your face and the camera crew when we were trying to film in Lviv, and of course the air raid siren goes off, and there's just a kind of shrug. This is our reality, right? We're just going to carry on, but also that noise is very penetrating. You can't help but
And it's
feel it.
different. And it's different in different cities, in different parts of
Yes,
Ukraine. You can hear it and you can feel differently. And your reaction in Lutsk, Lviv, Kyiv, Zaporizhia will be different because like the probability is different. And
that's absolutely right. And you'll also on the ground have some kind of awareness that there's a randomness to it, but also sometimes you might find yourself, driving past a military academy or a training area or what clearly is a military base. And there's that little bit in your brain thinking, okay, well, let's just move on a little bit faster and get out of here and get onto somewhere else because
uh,
there's accident and there's design behind some of these attacks.
I remember my first visit to Kyiv after the start of this full-scale war, and Kyiv was heavily attacked, and I was coming from a zone that is safer, and coming there, hearing the first air raid alerts in Kyiv, and I was in the district that I don't know well, and this was exactly on my mind. What are the military locations here? And also, where is the closest underground station? And then you notice a lot of people that walk around and they are not in a hurry, and you don't know who is crazy, them or you. What should you do? And that is one of the reasons why I always worry for people who come from abroad to visit Ukraine, because you can make some mistakes either based on your anxiety or based on some mistakes that we do because we are exhausted with this constant air raid alerts, and many people ignore them, and this causes tragedies. And but like when you live 3 years with constant air raid alerts, you get tired. And when you travel with someone, you don't need you need to hide. You're not that tired even as us. So that's one of the reasons why I don't advise visiting Ukraine yet.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's fine to go if you have purpose, and you are, obviously a lot of people convince themselves they have purpose when perhaps they don't. But if you're doing something that genuinely helps, support Ukraine and its resilience to fight back, then I think that's perfectly valid. War tourism, as it's called, that doesn't feel right and good, and I certainly wouldn't encourage anyone to sort of do that just to get an impression. But if you're taking medical aid over, if you're taking vehicles over, if you're transporting stuff, or if, as a good friend of mine who frequently travels to the front lines does, he's working with drones. And yeah, you've got a real reason to go to these particular places.
I'm very grateful to all the people who come, even if they come for this purely touristic purpose, because for Ukrainians on the ground, it's always a good sign that you're coming, that you're buying, that you're talking, that you want to see the country. We like that. We don't hate that. I was saying it because I'm worried for the people. So
Yeah,
it's
of
not the
course,
reason I
of
don't
course.
want you to come here. I just want you to be okay. And if for any reason you come, I don't mean you because you're inexperienced. You're half Ukrainian, Jonathan. Let's be realistic. And I mean, it's good to have someone around who is for a long time in Ukraine or who is Ukrainian and who can simply navigate you, guide you, and help you in case of emergency. So have this context, just like don't travel totally unprepared. That's what's important.
That's it. That's it. And even though it's not particularly welcome in many places anymore, I do have the fallback that at least I can communicate in people in Russian. And even if they choose not to speak back in Russian, I can make myself understood. And when people are talking Ukrainian, I'll understand maybe about 30%. Sometimes that rises to 40% if I know what's being discussed. So
You
there's a
drink beer.
yes, but add beer, and I understand 40% Ukrainian. Without beer, it's quite a bit lower. And the beer is good as well as the food. I should mention that as well. I'm not too sure on the horseradish vodka. That's an acquired
I don't
taste.
drink that, so
No, no, I wouldn't.
not.
It's not my thing, really. I tried it and I'm like, yeah, not so much. But well, is there anything you want to mention as well? Because I know you've got to pop off. We've had a fantastic conversation. We should definitely, well, we definitely will make sure the next one is far sooner because we will probably be recording that face to face. Spoilers for the audience there.
You have stolen my question
Oh
because
no.
my question is to your supporters, to your viewers, to your community. Would you like us to meet in Lviv and record an interview together? Because that's exactly what I want and what I
Oh, that's
intend to do. But I want you to cheer us
we,
to do that.
we
Hmm.
should have done a poll or something and then convinced the audience that we're doing it for them. But no, there's a good chance we'll be able to record live. There's a good chance we'll be able to collaborate on interviewing some other people as well, third-party people, and making some other videos. So I think that will be tremendous and of tremendous value. Um, and look forward to that.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the documentary you're working in. And I'm really grateful that you have people around you who make it more and more possible with each day. And we've discussed that before we started recording. I am, like a very sensitive reader and listener, and I feel like you've got some really amazing ideas, very different from what many report from close to the front lines, from the front lines. And I'm looking forward to that very much. Maybe you could share just a little bit of what is the update, and so that we all can support this project and
Yes.
soon watch this project.
Absolutely. So we're just about to hit sort of 19-20% of the overall funding. In order to go and do all the filming, we only need to get to the 50% point. And once we've done the
Mhm.
film, we can start releasing little bits of it as teasers to help, fund the rest, which is the editing and distribution. So we're not that far off. We're not quite at 50% of the 50%, but we're not that far off. And but we really want to make this sooner rather than later. It's important that it's made. I think this half of the year, June, July, ideally, we're going to try and accelerate to get the funding we need to unlock that. It'll take a couple of weeks. The filming process itself will be a couple of weeks on the ground in Ukraine with professional equipment, broadcast quality, or rather, film, not just broadcast quality equipment, but cinema quality equipment is what we want to go with, and an experienced team, many of whom will have been to Ukraine numerous times and have experience reporting not just generally, but reporting from Ukraine and deep connections. I think that's important here. We're not going in and as journalists coming in fresh and imposing our vision on things. We want to have a sort of deep, close connection and understanding of what's going on to try and really bring out these stories. And the overall theme is people um, trying to preserve their freedom, living in a free way, expressing themselves in various ways, right on the edge of where that freedom is possible. Because once you enter a Russian occupied zone or Russian territory itself that's occupied by the Russian army, that is the point at which the freedoms that we value end. They cease. All of them cease. And you're in a world of authoritarianism. You're in a world of torment, trauma, uh, where every narrative is observed, monitored, sculpted, crafted, projected by the regime as a weapon. So I think it's important to understand that it's not relative. That there's a massive difference on one side and on the other, and that's what the fight is for.
You know, I imagine like this tide, and really close to the Russian border, this tide of freedom is super high.
Yes.
And it's important to remember that, and to remember that perhaps this is a great geopolitical divide, I don't know, something tectonic.
Yeah.
Ukraine and the Russian Federation starts. And our
It's like
task
river
is
water
to
and salt water. It's like sort of, volcano meets ice. It's that kind of difference.
yeah.
Anna, what a pleasure to speak again. I hope the audience have enjoyed this as much as I have, and I look forward to the next time. And congratulations on your new material and everything you do. It's extraordinarily inspiring.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to the real meeting in Lviv.